Bodhicitta, how are we doing?
Great.
A little behind, to be honest.
A little behind?
Yeah, it's doing a lot of refuge studying and
Time management.
yeah.
So don't forget that on Sunday, Nancy Rinpoche is coming. We'll have the usual meditation, unless I just can't do it because I'm too nervous. But from 10:15 to 10:45, and if you do come, please try to come, at 10:45, not 11, since we can't really pinpoint, and also it's considered respectful to be waiting for the teacher and, or greeting the teacher when they arrive, not out there chit-chatting and getting your tea while he walks in and nobody notices. It's creates the cause to not meet the teachings even when they're right in your face. So, okay, I don't know what I think. I know. Maybe there's no volume? I wonder if the computer has to be off. Well, I had to turn it on because I had to load audio files. So.
Are you certainly on right now?
Well, yeah. Well, there is no light on this, and I think that means there's no signal.
How about batteries?
We just changed them, but that could also be the case. Maybe it is just the batteries again. And on Sunday, I recommend that we just go ahead and put new batteries in. So,
Those are on there.
just so we don't have to worry about this problem.
The thumb is the key.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me turn it off. I have this fear that because she's playing with batteries and I have the headphones on, I might be in danger. This is how little I understand electricity. Did you turn off the computer? Okay, I don't know what it is. Well,
I don't think it can be the batteries.
no, I don't either, because we just put new batteries in. In fact, the ones in your hand are probably not dead. Or you can put these in there, and we'll just put those back.
And when you were messing with the computer, you didn't take anything from him.
No, we didn't have to.
You can't do
Okay, as usual, my technology karma continues. I had Chris create a, I don't even know what you call them anymore, like a tape, only whatever it is now, but it's not a tape. Whatever. I really don't know what to call it. An electronic file of the tunes that we chant with visiting teachers. And so he emailed it to me, and it just wouldn't download on my computer. I had to get it from my phone onto my computer. So.
You're not alone.
It's just so funny. Well, I can tell you from my side, yelling at your computer probably causes negative karma. I am now not yelling at inanimate objects, at least not electronic ones. So, there's they could all be bodhisattvas going. We'll see how far we have to push her before she finally gives up. I'd let it go for today, but we'll want to work on it because Yancy Rinpoche is not a loud speaker. Okay. So take a moment to just remember why you come to this class. And any reason is probably good enough. And try to set a positive intention to use your time well. So we've been talking about how to generate bodhicitta. And so there are two methods for that. And the first method, the 7 cause and effect method. You begin with equanimity. So take a moment just to refresh this idea that all living beings are equal in wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer. And our preference for our friends to be happy and our enemies to suffer is all about us. We call people friends because they help us. We call people difficult enemies because we feel that they harm us or get in our way, or we just don't have a preference for them. And then strangers are people we don't think about. So it all has to do with our perspective. It's what they do or don't do for us. So if we set that aside, we can start to accept that all sentient beings are equal. Our friends are somebody else's enemies. Strangers to us are somebody's friends. The labels are very fluid, and they are all dependent on our point of view. So there's no reason to leave some beings out when we wish beings to be happy and free of suffering. And then we want to think about the possibility, if the Buddhist teachings are correct, that we've had many lives, and in each of these lives, we've had a mother. So, since there's no beginning to our consciousness, we can go back and back and back, and pretty much conclude that all beings have at one time been our mother. And we have been everybody else's mother. We've been their friends, we've been their enemies, we've been their strangers. Sometimes all in the same life. So we've relied on all these sentient beings for the care of a mother. So if we just think about the kindness of our own mothers in this life, the people who took care of us when we were defenseless, helpless. We can remember all their kindnesses. We may not remember just how many diapers they changed. We may not remember how many times they got up in the middle of the night to soothe us. How many times they fed us, clothed us, taught us words. All the billions of things that our parents did for us. So now we're still alive. We can speak our language. We know how to walk. We know how to get dressed, put on our shoes. And these things were done whether they wanted to do them or not. So if we can think about all these kindnesses, sit with it, we can generate the wish to repay those kindnesses. If you're a parent in this life, you know how challenging and how much effort it takes to take care of a baby, to take care of a toddler. You know how much worry is involved. And someone did this for you. And not just in this life, but in life after life, since beginningless time. And these steps of recognizing that all sentient beings could have been our mother, remembering their kindness, and wishing to repay their kindness, can help us cultivate affection for all sentient beings. Having this affection can be the basis for great compassion and great love to arise, where we sincerely wish that all beings were free from suffering and had only happiness. Just like a mother that takes on the responsibility the well-being and happiness of her child. Great compassion and great love can be the foundation to generate the highest intention to be responsible for the happiness of others. Not just the ones we like, but every single suffering sentient being. We can take on the responsibility or the wish to be able to free them from suffering. And that we will do whatever we can do in order to actualize this. So with the mind of great compassion, mind of great love, and with this highest intention, Bodhicitta is born. The wish to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. This comes from the wisdom of knowing that in order to be able to help all sentient beings, we need to attain an enlightened mind, the mind of a Buddha. So bring your awareness that you're not alone in this room, that there are others around you, and they are who they appear to be, suffering sentient beings. And we can generate the wish that we all be free of suffering. And we can generate the wish for all the people in the room next door, that they are free of suffering. And we can keep having that wish ripple out till it encompasses every single suffering sentient being without exception. What obstacles come up when you think of trying to generate any of these steps? Equanimity.
Self-centeredness.
In what way?
I mean, mine. It seems like it's kind of a habit of mine, you know. So, I mean, I become more and more aware of it. But, so what's in it for me?
So that whatever our self-interest is can block us. Let's be more specific. What kinds of self-interest get in our way?
Concern, protection of my reputation, concern, protection of my physical well-being, concern, protection for my wants, desires, my perceived.
So how is that an obstacle? What goes on in our minds? Like, it's really easy to sit here in this room and think, yes, I'd like everybody. Yeah, no problem. Just don't get me out there, you know, waiting somewhere and ask me how thrilled I am that someone's making me wait.
I think we default into to thinking, to becoming the center of our focus. And so what you can so you can easily be in a conversation with people and say, oh wow, I wasn't really paying attention to what that person was saying or being there for them. I was thinking from my side only, like what can I say to protect my own reputation? Not necessarily with the meditation, because when I'm sitting with meditation, I know that my focus is not me. So
Well,
it's a little easier.
why? Because we put it somewhere else. So it's sort of like, it's not like the mind of self-interest kind of arises. It's sort of like, that's how we function. You know, we're just so habituated to look at everything from what's in it for me or what's not in it for me. So that underscores the importance of practice. You know, that you have to think about these things again and again and again, so that, you know, as we're about to do something, say something, you know, in our self-interest is right there, we can go, oh, wait a minute. You know, let me step back for a moment and consider there are other people involved. You know, so that we can perhaps release our grip on our self-interest a little bit. Sometimes this is very easy to do, you know, because it's not a big deal to us. What we don't, so you can start with those things. You just don't want to make that the only time that you're willing to set your self-interest aside, you know. So there are different ways we can practice with this. One of which is just to think about it regularly. Oh yeah, that's right. That the reason why it's hard for me to take other people's points of view in, I apparently didn't turn off my phone. It keeps nagging. So we really want to, what have we talked about before? How do we inspire ourselves to want to change the way we think? So like with self-centeredness.
Find a motivation to help.
And how do we look at that? One, I mean, there's some very standard ways that the teachings present. And I will say them again. So, you start with the benefits of changing how you think. What's in it? What's in it for you? Because we're good at that. We're good at figuring that out. Okay? So like with self-centeredness, we want to look at what's the advantage of being other-focused. And we have to come up with reasons that are meaningful to us. Then we look at what? This should be a clue. You start with the benefits of changing.
The disadvantages of not changing?
Yes, the disadvantages of staying self-centered. So you look at how does being self-centered actually harm me? And then you might even think about how does being self-centered harm others? But it's always good to just start with even yourself, you know. We want to look at why is staying self-centered not even in our best interest. So that requires a lot of thinking, you know. And it doesn't matter if the Buddha said so. You have to come up with your own reason of why you would want to bother to change, because it takes effort to change. You know, it's like I was watching some news report today about how we've got the technology to make some major changes in this country that would really help the environment, you know, really reduce our carbon, whatever. And it always comes down to, so we have the technology, we have some ideas about how to do it, but we don't have the political will to make it happen. That's our That's each of us. That's our individual will to make that happen, you know? And it's the same thing with working on our own mind. We have to develop our personal will that wants it. Just like, I don't know, you wanted that promotion and you went for it. And you didn't just want it, you did all sorts of things in order to create the conditions to make it likely that you get it. Is this making sense? This is a really important step. If we don't do this, it just stays words. Because self-interest, because we're habituated to it. You know how I talk about it being sort of like this tsunami of the mind, our habit energy? It just pushes us and pushes, and if our willingness to stop that is weak, we won't have any impact on the habit. And so really coming up with your own reasons why this might be a good plan can help. And then you have to familiarize yourself with your reasons so that when you're in the thick of it, out in the world, not just on your meditation seat, they'll pop up in your head and go, oh yeah, that's right. I'm kind of tired of being a jerk. This is easy for me to say because since being impatient is my favorite mindset, and that's basically what it is, being a jerk. And you know, it just comes down to that. So, and it's not going to be, our self-interest isn't always going to be really super obvious that it's kind of selfish. So, because we have a lot of rationalizations to support why we must take care of ourselves first, or our families, the me and mine routine. And the Buddha's is challenging us to think about, you know, it might be possible that that's our mistake to begin with. The reason we have a messed up world, a messed up culture, you know, all of these problems continue century after century is because we keep thinking that self-interest will protect us, make us happy, blah, 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 getting what we want. But perhaps what we need to do is cherish others to get happiness, a sane world, those things. And so in order to, you know, you have to really think about that, you know, and kind of look at it. And then look at how you feel when you come from a place of self-centeredness and when you come from a place of otherness. And see if there's a difference. Because you already act that way, you know. It's not like we're just, you know, walking around like a 2-year-old going, mine, mine, mine. You know, we have our moments. You know, so we want to notice, what are we more comfortable doing? You know. So some of this logic, the Nectar of Manjushri's speech is Kunzang Peldon's commentary on the Bodhisattva's way of life. It's also in the chapters on the Bodhisattva's way of life. This particular argument is part of the perfection of meditation or concentration, or the chapter titles are always different, but it goes through this logic. So when we're trying to really think about the equality of self and other, first, you know, we can look at the fact that self and other is a point of view. And right now, we kind of elevate our self and the selves of our loved ones above others, other selves. You might not, Arlene. That might be why you're generally, when we ask you how your mind is, you go happy. See, she's an example of how it works. So, you know, but this is the thing. So we want to look, you know, certain qualities that we talk about in here that you might be able to go, oh, you know, when I look, I'm pretty good at that. Well, rejoice. I mean, that's the appropriate response, is to rejoice. That's a wonderful habit. If you're still, you know, on other areas, you might still need some work. But I got lost. Where was I going?
You're talking about I and other being
Oh, yes,
labels.
I and self.
Okay.
I and self are the same. Self, I, me, all of those things.
Oh, you're saying they were point of views.
Yeah, they're point of views. And so right now, we elevate the self that we claim and the selves of our loved ones above everybody else's selves. But if we look at what the label self means, what is the label self? What is that label? What's the basis for that label, self?
An individual person.
What is an individual person? What's the label person? Individual. What is it made up of? What are the
Body and
parts?
mind.
Oh.
Body and mind.
Body and mind. Self is the name we give this body and mind. And everybody would point to a different this, you know? So there's no difference. It's a name we give to a body and mind. But we claim massive importance to the one that we call self. And you call yourself self, you call yourself self, and hence this kind of problem. There are a whole bunch of very important selves in every room. We can also, instead of seeing us as self and other, we can just see a whole bunch of selves. We're one self amongst many selves.
Just look at the body and mind.
Yeah, and there, you know, there's a body and mind over there, there's a body and mind over there, there's a body and mind over there, there's a body or mind over here, you know. But that understanding the sense of this body and mind is somehow more important than that body and mind is really ridiculous. And we just really want, but we need to come up with ways in which to understand that. So one way is to, instead of underlining this division of self and other all the time in our minds, in our actions, we just start to think of ourselves, possibly not at all, but you know, basically as one self amongst many selves. So like we are one sentient being amongst a collection of sentient beings. And in Buddhism, that collection of sentient beings includes what?
All living beings.
All
insects.
living beings. So it includes human beings, it includes cats, it includes amoebas and minnows, every being with a mind. So it's really expansive. So just as we immediately protect a thing when we purchase it and identify it as mine, we can immediately protect all sentient beings as soon as we identify them as mine. So just like the moment you pay for an item, if you drop it, your reaction to dropping it is vastly different than when, if the cashier drops it before you pay for it. We want to change that attitude. We want to see that the object that's dropped by the cashier is the same object that you drop. You know. And if we're distressed by it being broken, we should be distressed that it's broken, no matter who drops it. So in the same way, well, you know, if we can recognize that all sentient beings are suffering, and it, you know, just like we know we want to be free of suffering, we can look at it as suffering needs to be removed. Doesn't matter who has it. It's just that we want to end suffering. We don't have to take ownership and say, my suffering needs to be removed. You know, I'm sorry you're suffering, but yeah, I can live with that. As the Buddha said, we're never going to find happiness if we keep maintaining this mistaken idea that somehow your happiness doesn't impact my happiness. So the more we can like lessen this sense of separation from other living beings, the more we can see that, you know, become this part of mine. This is my community, meaning the whole collection. I just love this. This is this particular one about as soon as you buy something and you think it's yours, how we protect it. You know, when you get that, I don't know, whatever it is, like you get a new phone, and then you make sure you get a really good case for it. And then eventually, you know, you just throw it in your purse and you don't care, you know? It's like, it's old now, you know? But at first, it's really precious. This is what happens. So we want to use it as a strength. We just want to make a much bigger collection of mine. Since we already have that habit, what we need to do is include everything in that circle. Since your I and my I are the same in wanting only happiness and not wanting suffering, we could see all sentient beings as I and protect all sentient beings as mine. So whatever we can do when we're just quietly reflecting on this, when we're practicing, to help us really find the common ground between us so that we can, you know, so that naturally compassion arises when we think of their suffering, you know, that it's, you know, it's like when you know, it's really easy to practice with the news, you know, that to just, you know, no matter where it's happening in the world, to be able to go, wow, you know, you know, because we can see them as if they were our mothers, or as if they were our own precious children. So we can use what we already do, which is we have compassion, we have love for people we like, or our family, you know, whether we like them or not. But we usually can have, you know, we just naturally have it. You know, when our best friend comes in and clearly is upset, you know, we really want to know why, and we want to comfort them. So we want to expand that view outward.
So, so last week we were talking about the idea of affection being part of the process of kind of looking at all things with affection, all sentient beings with affection. And when contemplating that, I thought, well, you know, sometimes I find myself actually revolted by something. You know, me and my roaches, right? So, so when I find that's the case, when there's somebody I don't like, right?
Well, you have to make that distinction. Is it something or somebody?
somebody, or something is I don't know, would somebody be an insect? Would somebody be a
Yes,
cat?
somebody would be an insect.
Okay, so then we'll stick with the
They're all
somebody.
persons.
Okay, so we'll stick with somebody's then.
Okay. So this is the first error of thinking.
The somebody versus something?
Yeah. Because how is a person, a body and mind revolting?
Well, that's it. It could be appearance, it could be something
Oh,
that.
so their appearance is revolting.
It could be the appearance, it could be,
Why does that make that person revolting?
well, this is kind of where I'm getting to, is that.
This is my point, though.
Right.
So listen up.
Okay.
You know, we really want to break it down into steps,
Right,
okay? So when we say someone's revolting, what do we actually mean?
I perceive them as revolting.
right, there's something that I see
There's
that
something I don't
I
like.
don't like, right.
And we then say, then I don't like you. As opposed to compassion for, say, their appearance. Wow, that must be tough to have that skin disease. Since right now we see nothing but commercials for psoriasis. You know? So we want to be very specific in our minds.
Right.
So when someone comes into our view, we don't want to equate their actions of body, speech, and mind, or even their appearance of body, speech, and mind, with the person. You know how sometimes, well, maybe you don't. Let's hope you don't. But sometimes, in my experience, you can meet someone and just not like them. It's just like, you just don't like them. They don't even really have to have said anything. Is that a good basis for not liking them? No. Yeah, that's right. They're spewing negative energy. And we will do that. I have heard people who are really into, who are very in tune to energy, they say, oh, I don't like their energy. And then you have to have compassion for them for being sensitive to energy because they're harmed by it. As opposed to recognizing that we're back to our point of view.
Right, and what I was just gonna finish with was that, this turns out to be an excellent place for me to practice, is because when I notice when that comes up for me, and I find that almost all this I find in my body someplace, right? The feeling comes up. It's not necessarily the thought necessarily.
It's still following.
Right, but I don't notice the thought necessarily.
No, it's habituating.
Right, so I'll notice the bodily reaction, the physical reaction, and that gives me the opportunity to practice, to say, oh.
Look what I'm doing.
Look what I'm doing.
I'm turning
right.
this person into an appearance of a person.
Right, or this thing, or this other type of sentient being like an insect into something abhorrent, when in fact it's really a miraculous being.
No, it's not. It's just bad karma ripening.
Oh, okay, well, it still looks miraculous to me when I really look. When I really
Yeah,
take a
and that
look.
could be you in the next life.
Right.
Because it really is kind of amazing. I told you about how I watched The Blue Planet or something, and watched this little fish whose entire life was spent in the deep, deep, deep of the ocean eating this plant next to it. And I thought, wow, that's me in a bag of popcorn. And me isn't in almost any snack at all. I just, it's like, oh, it's not enough that they're in the kitchen. I have to put it in the table next to me. And then it's not enough, And no, I don't want a little bowl of it. Let's just bring the bag, just in case. This creates the cause for that kind of life. So, it isn't. We want to really, when we practice, so we notice, revulsion has arisen. That is our habit of mind that is reacting to our self-interest, our preference of one thing over another. It says nothing about the other being. It says everything about us. We all do this.
live and let live and just take it as they are and not the way you want them, and everybody's allowed to have and be and do.
It just has nothing to do with, what did our module on karma teach us about what we experience?
I mean, we don't know what's going on in someone else's mind.
Well, that's one thing.
So,
Cause and effect. So for us to experience it, what has to have happened?
We created the cause.
We
first.
created the cause. So if a repulsive being comes into our view, why would that happen?
That was us in a prior life.
It's because we created the cause to have this experience of being revolted. It has nothing to do with the other person, which is why so often we're wrong about people. Our first impressions are completely unreliable because they're completely founded on our habits. Ooh, this kind of body is disgusting to me, or this kind of hair color is disgusting. I don't know, it's really hard to come up with examples. But, you know, like when I was a teenager, I was really snobby about Southern accents. You know, I grew up in New Orleans, and I pretty much didn't have any kind of thick Southern accent. But there are people in New Orleans who do. But more than that, you know, I'd have vacations in Mississippi and Georgia, you know, and South Carolina and North Carolina. And then I moved to North Carolina and developed a really Southern accent. But when I was a teenager, I just decided that Southern accents meant you were stupid. That was founded on nothing. It was founded on the fact that to my ear, the sound, I'm sure, in fact, if I really look, I'm sure it's due to the fact that because of that sound, since I have no good speech karma, I couldn't understand what was being said. So it probably reflected my inability to understand someone with my decision that it must be their problem. So hopefully I will go get hearing aids when I need them. But the point is that it is our habits that are creating, you know, these conditions. So we tend to go, you know, so we have this self-interest. That's there all the time, you know. But so is this habit of thinking that things external to us are the reason we think the way we do. It's not that I mean, we really have trouble separating our experience of dislike from the object. We really do think it's coming from the object. And even though we know intellectually, not everybody sees that object and it's an object of dislike. I mean, insects have sex, and I have more insects. So there's, you know, they attract each other.
Ew.
Ew. Oh, that's cute. So, every time, this is why it's so wonderful to work with, because every time our body and mind kind of go, ew, you know, it's like, ooh, look what I'm doing. I'm letting my preference form a conclusion about someone else. And this is why, I mean, when you know, in elementary school, when they, you know, do tests with kids about who would you not want to be part of your group or pick on a team, and obesity is the number one group that no one wants to be associated with. So we can think that our quick judgments like that, based on appearance, we keep them to ourselves. We don't say, maybe we say something to the insect, but we in general don't say anything to other human beings. And that doesn't have an impact, but it does. Because it affects what friends we make. This is how we are. We didn't stop it with childhood. We do learn as we grow up, and shift a little bit. But we're operating an awful lot from that same habit energy. And not all kids do it, which is sort of this evidence that it's not coming from the side of the object. It's our habit of going with what our preferences are. As if our preferences have any meaning at all. There's no problem with preference in the sense of there's no reason not to spend time with people you enjoy versus people you don't enjoy. But when we're trying to benefit others, preference can get in the way. So we want to, work with that. Also, it's another good way to really look in the mirror, to really understand that most people have sort of a distorted self-image, and tends towards the negative. But what did he call it, whatever the expression is, which I can't seem to think of. So, but when you put your cards on the table, let's face it, my repulsive areas are not as repulsive as your repulsive area. Because that's how we can go, ooh, as if there's nothing here to go ooh about. This is, this is that self-interest blocking our view. In the same way, one protects one's entire body when only one part is threatened. Sentient beings could protect all sentient beings when one sentient being is threatened. Thich Nhat Hanh does this wonderful thing where he stands here, like putting a nail into the wall and hitting his thumb. Bam! That this hand's not going, no, you stupid hand. Why did you let your thumb get in the way? It just takes care of it. It immediately holds the other thumb, and hopes that it will feel better soon. There's no sense of sort of like, well, you deserve it, you got in the way. Which is kind of what we do with each other. Not with our loved ones. Except when they're being an idiot, and then we do. So we want to watch our mind that tends to separate ourselves from others if for some reason we think they're just being stupid, or we think that has nothing to do with me. Am I making any sense? This is a slow kind of, you really have to just keep looking at these things, that we really, just like we're a bunch of parts. Every self is a name on a whole bunch of parts of body and mind. And just like, if we get an infection on our foot, we don't go, oh, it's just my foot. No biggie. We understand that it's part of a whole. So we might as well treat the foot.
Would it be like, I guess the way for me to understand it, it would be like regardless of what my foot did, I still would care for it. So regardless of what this person did, they didn't learn from their bad mistakes, they kept making the same one, I should still care and not pass judgment.
Well,
So that's how
and it's sort of like, it's so helpful then to look at yourself and say, do I think I've really never done something stupid? And do I really, think about children. If our mothers were standing there and going, I'll take care of you when you quit being an idiot, probably none of us would have made it to today. We have to look at the illogic of our reasoning when we are dismissive towards others. And so just instead of, let's face it, we take care of ourselves even though ourselves aren't perfect. It's tricky, isn't it, though? It's not like we don't get mad at ourselves when we do things that we know are not good for us, and then we have consequences of that. But we try to finally decide, okay, that was then, I'm going to try to do better now. I'm certainly not going to say, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go into a diabetic coma because, hey, I deserve it. Because I've been taking poor care of myself, and so, too bad. We need to see how we judge ourselves and others that way. And when we're doing that, when we're kind of rationalizing why we don't jump into hell, we want to really understand whether or not it's baseless or not. If it's really a legitimate reason. So when the teachings talk about generosity, and you want to know who should you give to, and it goes through, I think, 13 things or something, 14 different things. And basically the conclusion when you get to the end of it is anybody who asks. It has nothing to do with whether they deserve it or not, need it or not, anything. And if you want to develop the mind of generosity, now this doesn't mean we don't need to use wisdom, but the point is there is, no boundaries based on another person's actions. We may have boundaries because we don't have unlimited wealth. So we can't just give everything away. Or probably you can never give everything away. Because we have to also, we have a responsibility as part of a community to take care of ourselves. But the boundaries we set shouldn't be about them. So we really, so this, we have so many opportunities through the day to see when we're kind of justifying our self-interest. Because they really are revolting. These, any insect you look under a microscope with, or a magnifying glass, or a zoom lens on a camera, can look pretty amazing, and not always in a good way.
what is amazing to me sometimes is how picayune my selfishness can be, over small little things.
This is how we are.
Why is this up?
I mean, we could just kind of like, oh yeah, that's great, but wouldn't it be nicer if it was just, had more blue in it? We're kind of,
Yes, exactly.
the fact that we, to me, the fact that we even notice is like an astonishing evidence of we're just concerned about our likes. Like really, that I can even spend any mental energy of even noticing what colors are in a fabric. Have I looked out the window lately and seen the problems of the world? Doesn't mean we can't, again, preference is fine. I mean, preference just comes out of all these different causes and conditions that are arising, in this life. We have preferences because when our good karma ripens, we have experiences of pleasure. I have a preference for chocolate because when I eat it, I experience pleasure. That's just, that's a positive action ripening in my experience of food. When I eat bitter melon, I try not to eat it. I don't know if you've ever experienced bitter melon. The Vietnamese love it. They love it. For them, it's a ripening of good karma to have bitter melon. For me, it's a hell realm. So we can start to lessen this idea we have that things exist in the way that we experience them. That chocolate is inherently delicious. How do we know that's not true?
Then it would be the same for everybody.
Surely everybody likes chocolate. Is that true? No.
No, they don't like chocolate.
Right. That's exactly right. It's not in the chocolate. So we need to remember these things when we're responding to the world and recognizing, oh, if I don't like something, what is that evidence of?
You're putting yourself into the world. It's null and void. It's not about you, it's about them.
But you created the cause.
It's just negative karma ripening. And the more we grasp onto, ooh, I don't like that, and have aversion, the more we're going to experience this. Because we're practicing it. Yeah, it's this habitual reaction. And we really think happiness and suffering comes from outside of us. So the more we can be accepting of whatever is, that does not mean that we don't change circumstances that we can, that are, it has nothing to do with saying, oh, I just have to accept, whatever falls my way in terms of not doing anything to perhaps prevent it in the future or whatever. No, I mean, we want to do things to reduce our suffering in the future. But one of the ways we can reduce our suffering in the future is quit thinking that external objects are what decides whether we're happy or unhappy. And we want to lessen this belief that getting what we want makes us happy. Because when you don't get what you want, it's possible to be happy. So we might as well learn how, you know. And when things don't work out the way we were hoping, we don't have to be unhappy. And this lessens the importance of what's happening, you know. And the more that we can focus on others, then the less this little dissatisfaction that constantly eats away at us even arises, because we're not thinking about it. You know, it's like athletes. You know, in the big game, you know, athletes don't really notice if they're, you know, in minor pain. I mean, I did see a basketball game where someone's broke their leg and the bone was sticking out. I thought, yeah, that's when you stop. You know, but in general, you know, good athletes or even bad athletes who really like their sport kind of don't even notice the minor stuff that happens because they're in it for the, you know, the win or the team or whatever. I mean, you know, and we all have things that we're that driven about. When, at least when we're younger. And not much I'm driven about now. But, you know, well, that's not true, though. You know, it's like my month in Taiwan, you know. So, you know, if we are determined to do something, we tolerate a lot of physical discomfort. We tolerate a lot of mental discomfort. So this is, again, the point about why we look at the advantages and the disadvantages so that we can motivate ourselves to make the effort to do the work, to change something. To cling to the body and mind of this instant, this moment, and the next as being the same thing is a mistaken conception of permanence. How does this work?
There's nothing to cling to.
This is one of the reasons why we say when you search for the self in the body and mind, you can't find it. Why? Because everything's momentary. We know that the self that we call me as a 5-year-old is different from the self that I call me as a 63-year-old. You know, we know that. Yet we persist in clinging to it as if there is some self that, you know, there's something that's permanent about me that makes it, you know, why, you know, I'm not you. But actually, we change moment to moment. The body and mind changing. I mean, you know, this is changing moment to moment. It's kind of outrageous. Nothing exists in a static way. All those parts are interchangeable. It's just constant change. So thinking that this moment and the next moment somehow are the same moment is an obstacle. This is one of the ways we hold others, you know, you meet the perfect partner, you know, for 6 weeks, they're perfect. And then something happens, they're not so perfect. And we're kind of surprised because we really think, or hope, I don't know what it is, but we really, as soon as we put a name on something, that very next moment, we think it is that, which which is why wrong impressions surprise us. I'm sorry, you know. But it's also why when we're in relationships, when we are so like, well, wait a minute. You've never said anything like that before. It's like there's a contract that says, I'm sorry, as soon as I agree to be with you, you cannot surprise me anymore. And then, of course, there's that clause, except when I'm bored, I want you to surprise me. You know, but only if I agree to it in advance. You know, good luck with surprising me when you have to tell me about it in advance. But anyway, but I mean, this is, you know, we really want things. It's like, do you ever feel like, I just want to get everything just, you know, right? And, you know, like, okay, finally, when I'm 63, you know, I'm going to have, you know, a place to live, I'm going to have a job I like, you know, whatever, everything will be kind of okay, and it will stay that way until I drop dead, you know. If I hope for that, I'm going to be sorely disappointed. And it also makes me crazy when something goes terribly wrong, because it reduces my ability to tolerate change. Because I think change is bad for some reason, you know. Instead of change is the status quo. So if I want my happiness or my, you know, if I really believe my happiness or suffering depends on outside of me, I'm in trouble. Because this is always changing. So one of the points of this argument is that just because you're not the same as me doesn't mean that I shouldn't want to help you. Because I'm not the same as me in every moment. You know? Me's just the convenient label I give to me in every moment. But every moment's separate. So our reasoning for saying, oh, but, you know, my happiness is not related to their happiness is from this false sense of separation. Because the fact that everything's momentary doesn't, in fact, it actually underscores how interdependent we are. So we don't have to be the same in order to be deserving of compassion and love.
From my perspective, what helps me, how this notion helps me is with the idea of, for lack of a better way to phrase it right now, but for the grace of God, go I, right? So that I can very easily switch places with somebody in an instant.
And karma really teaches that.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that, you know, if you take all the Buddhist perspective of that consciousness has always existed. Your stream of consciousness, your stream of consciousness, your stream of consciousness, your stream of consciousness, my stream of consciousness has always existed. Because consciousness is non-physical, it doesn't die. You know, it is not due to our bodies. The brain, our human body and human brain are terrific supports for our mind, but they are not the same thing as our mind. So we have life after life after life with different bodies. We have different hotels that our mind resides in, and some are better than others as far as being able to support our mind. You know, when we're that insect, good luck trying to be enlightened, you know. Not going to happen because you don't have a good physical support for your mind. I had a point. I'm becoming more and more like a sieve every day.
You're trying to say we were eventually where this person was?
Well, there's no doubt, since we haven't gotten out of this cyclic existence, we're not Buddhas yet, we have made every mistake there is to make. Not just once. Again and again and again and again. So all those people out there who think, oh, they must have done something really bad in a past life to have that be happening to them now. It's just not ripening for us in this moment, you know? I mean, it's just, it's really, this is why we talk so much about making good use of a life that has good conditions, because your next one might not be so great. You know, we want to create the causes to have another good life, that where you're not born in a war zone, or you're not born in a country, you know, suffering from famine, where you can meet teachings, where you have leisure time, you know. So, you know, we want to not waste it. And one of the ways in which the Buddha says we waste it is we keep persisting in thinking that our self-centeredness is the way to guarantee our happiness. And Buddhism is not the only religion that teaches that. Caring for others is pretty much a universally accepted, you know, aspect of a religious teaching, of a spiritual path. I suspect there's a reason for that. In the same way, to cling to my parts but not cling to their parts, to protect my parts and not protect their parts, is a mistaken concept of separateness. I mean, I think the easiest way to think about this is just in terms of, you know, the global environment. You know, that it matters that we have clean air, clean water, that it matters whether or not global warming, that whether or not we can change global warming. Mm-hmm. It matters whether Miami falls into the ocean. What happens if the coastlines all become underwater?
We end.
No, we don't end. We become refugees. We become that group of people that are going into some other space, and people are going, sorry, we don't have room. You know. We're very dependent on each other. You know, so thinking about the fact that none of us would probably be walking around in clothes if there weren't lots of people out there making clothes. And if there weren't lots of people out there making fabric. And if there weren't lots of people out there making thread. And if there weren't lots of people out there building machines that can do all this stuff with this stuff. I mean, good grief, we make fleece out of plastic bottles. I can't even begin to imagine that process. So we're entirely dependent on being protected from the weather by the efforts of others. Then these little clothes can get too tight because of all the food we eat. And though that the food we eat doesn't just depend on people who are alive today, it depends on all the people who were alive before us who bothered to, like, save seeds and plant seeds and, you know, not trash the environment, you know, 100 years ago, so we could still grow food, you know. It's like kind of incredible. I love just thinking about, wow, I've got water in this cup that's drinkable. And I didn't have to walk to a well to get it. I didn't have to do anything to get it. It was just sitting here for me. You know? You know, how easy. But it's not easy for everybody. But even the people for whom it is difficult to attain, they still rely on other people to have it at all. So it's like, this is the miracle, that I have safe water to drink. And I had nothing to do with that. None of my effort is directly related to this cup of water. It's a, it's good karma ripening for me. But I've done nothing in this life to earn it. So who earned it? I like to think of it in terms of previous caretakers of my mind, which is still grasping at a person, at least a very changeable person. Okay. So whatever we can do to meaningfully remove this sense of separation from each other can help us quit being so partial about who we include in our circle of concern. And the good news is we already have evidence that we're perfectly capable of having, people in our circle of concern that we don't associate with me and mine. Pretty much any news story that involves children suffering, everybody responds to, That's our Buddha nature. We have a natural desire to remove the suffering of children, of puppies, of kittens, depending on who you are, like my nephew, rats, ferrets, all sorts of pets I wouldn't personally choose, because of preference. And we should rejoice that we have this, that this is what we do naturally. We just want to take that same quality we have and just recognize all those little children become suffering adults. And just like we're concerned when they suffer as children, we can be concerned when they suffer as adults. I'll be next week. That's the next method. And then we combine the two. Anyway. So basically, what we're trying to do is we want to try to work on our partiality. That we treat people differently, depending on what group we put them in, or we see them as friends, enemies, or strangers. So we want to work, then we can take it from that point of view about how fluid those kinds of labels are. We can look at it just as how really self and other is just a point of view. And if we logically look at it, there is absolutely there's also, just like there's no reason to elevate us above others, there's also no reason to put us below others. That we are the same. We have strengths, we have weaknesses, we have good karma ripening, we have bad karma ripening. Basically, most of us just don't know what we're doing. We're seeking happiness in the wrong way, again and again and again, by thinking that somehow our self-interest has to be a factor. But, intellectually, we understand if our self-interest doesn't come up, right away we suffer less. If we're not worried about ourselves, we're not worried about the headache, we're not worried about the red lights, we're not worried about the cough, we're not worried about, anything that's going on with us. We're just not thinking about it. It's just, whatever. We just go in, So right away we can see that being self-focused doesn't improve things. It means we're absolutely going to notice all of our preferences, all of our dislikes, all our boredom. That's what I call being neutral. So, you look like you have doubt.
No, I was actually just looking at my own behavior, my own thought patterns, the way I operate. And what I was thinking about is how I can use the practice of developing bodhicitta to effectively begin to change my way of thinking. So what I notice about
That's the whole point,
right,
yeah.
right. And so what I notice in my behavior sometimes is that even though I know that I have a loving, kind, compassionate nature, and it's always my intent, it seems, and also my motivation to help others. I'm speaking particularly like in the work realm right now.
Mhm.
There are times when I behave in certain ways, whether it be through procrastination or other types of behaviors that actually might harm another. And so that's what I was specifically thinking about, is how I can use practice to start to change my MO.
Mhm. That's what we all want to do. So what we have to look at is in those behaviors that we do that we know impact others in an undesirable way, what's that about? You know? It's usually about big surprise, self-interest.
Right, something that's
You know, we procrastinate because we don't want to do something for whatever reason. Oh, because we're afraid we'll discover it's going to take longer than I thought. It doesn't matter what the reason is. We just don't want to have to do it yet. You know, even though intellectually we know, oh, this is just making it worse. Putting it off just makes it worse, you know. So, who's done their taxes, you know? It's just, you know. So we just have to look at, we don't have to do a whole lot of deep thinking, because usually we can just go, I bet you there's some self-centeredness going on. You know, I mean, it's, you know, but then we have to recognize, are we doing enough to prevent our, you know, compassion fatigue is probably self-cherishing in disguise. You know? But it means we're not doing things in a skillful way, because true compassion doesn't go away. It doesn't get tired. You know? Part of it is when we don't recognize our own limitations. We're not Buddhas. We don't know exactly how to help. You know, we feel helpless often. We make mistakes often. So if we keep thinking that perfection in my actions is the only proof of progress, we can wear ourselves out. It's like they have this expression in Tibetan Buddhism called, you know, that, oh, I'm suffering from lung, which is like a disorder of the winds, you know, the subtle wind energy of the bodies, whatever. And a lot of times, you know, we'll blame the practice, you know. Oh, I'm studying too much. Oh, I'm doing too much this, blah, blah, blah. It's giving me, look. You know, instead of recognizing, no, we're giving ourselves, look. You know, because we have, you know, we're not doing it with the motivation of wanting to benefit others. It's, you know, we're getting in our own way. But also it can mean that, you know, that we keep trying to be perfect when we're not. The causes and conditions to be perfect aren't there yet. And not accepting our limitations and not be comfortable with our limitations, not being able to say, yes, I wish you would be free of suffering, and I can't help you with that. You know, I don't have the answers. I can only help so much. Or like, I mean, I'm sure anybody who's in a profession, you know, where people come to you because you are an expert in some field, where you have to say again and again, I can't make the decision for you. I'm giving you the information you need to make a good decision, or to make a decision, but I can't make the decision for you. There's, only so much I can do, and now you get to decide. Even doctors do that now. They've gone from God to not God. They've gone to God in recognizing lawsuits. So they know now that it's really the truth is in a lot of ways, because we haven't cured everything. There's a point at which you just kind of go, well, these are the choices, and I can tell you what some of the possible side effects of these choices are, the possible outcomes. And so you're going to have to decide based on your preferences what you want to try.
So I want to go back a couple steps. You were talking about compassion fatigue. Before that, we were talking about kind of like not thinking too hard. It sounded like not overanalyzing in a sense.
Well, you don't have to overanalyze why we have negative habits like procrastination.
Right, there's some self-interest, we know that, so we can
It's
just
not
leave.
some self-interest.
Right, it's total self-interest, so we can just leave it there, that piece
Yeah.
there, and then turn towards the practices that you're teaching us, right? Just do this.
Well, but you have to really also frame it in your reasoning.
Frame it in my reasoning.
This is why the Buddha said, you don't just take my word for it.
Oh, no, I
You
see it
can-
works. I see that I feel better when I'm working in
And you have to remind yourself of that.
Right, and I feel worse when I'm operating my own
Mhm.
self-interest. There's no question about that.
Yeah. And then we have to forgive ourselves when self-interest has taken over. You go, well, yesterday, And that may come from not being skillful in the power of relinquishment.
That's really important.
So the power of relinquishment is resting so that you can come back refreshed. So now Buddhas don't need rest because they don't struggle. We struggle with trying to change our minds and change our habits. They've succeeded. So we have to be very, we have to stretch ourselves and then realize, oh, I've gone too far. And then, or we have to go, I could probably try a little harder. We have to just keep kind of checking, and because it all depends on causes and conditions. So like on a month when you're sick, you're going to be way more limited in what you can do than in a month where you have no physical challenges. So it's not like we find the perfect amount of practice. It's going to depend. Everything is a dependent arising. So looking for, thinking you can pick up one of the texts and go, oh, here's the right answer. Not going to happen because it's going to depend on all the conditions, So this is why we have to develop our inner wisdom based on our conditions.
I haven't looked at it yet, but I suspect the meditation that you sent us this week is going to have...
Equilibrium one. Well, it depends. Some of them are... Anyway, well, Saturday, if you're participating in the day of meditation on Saturday, you'll have time to actually look at these 6 parts of developing bodhicitta and equanimity, in a longer way. And then, we're going to start looking at equalizing and exchanging self and other, which is another technique. But eventually you put the two together. So you have, so you think the meditation's long now. This is why you do these in parts. You get really familiar with each part. Like, oh, all sentient beings could have been my mother. You have to give that a lot of thought. Now His Holiness says you don't have to go there if you're just not, you're setting that aside. You can't go there to this idea there's no beginning. You can just think all sentient beings have helped me at some time. So remembering that, even the strangers might be the ones that are helping your food to end up on your table. You know, whatever ways you can, you know, expand your narrow view. And then recognizing that almost everybody in our life, those labels change depending on what they're doing for us at that moment. If they're complaining that we didn't take out the garbage, then in that moment they're those difficult people in our life. You know, if they're giving us a kiss on the way, you know, when we come in the door from a hard day's work, then they're that person that just loves me, you know. And that's great, but it's just like, it's, you know, it's fluid. And it's all about us. What are you doing for me now? Yeah, we're great. What have you done for me lately? So, you know. So we get familiar with the steps, but we have to, you know, you kind of take each step slowly so that you really kind of can come up with your own reasonings, you know, that are logical, but they're meaningful to you. Because the whole purpose of all of this is just to broaden our circle of concern. And it's not about detaching from our loved one. It's about developing that love for everyone. You know, but just like we don't have to tolerate bad behavior. You know, we can say, I'm sorry, as long as you're going to continue to do that, you can't live in my house. Or I'm moving because I can't tolerate your behavior and it's your house. So, you know, whatever perspective it is, you know, so it's not about letting people harm us because they're a suffering sentient being. It's about, in our minds, developing that mental attitude of not separating us into groups of deserving and undeserving. You know, that we're just all struggling, and sometimes we're not skillful at all. And it's not actually compassion to support someone in unskillful behavior. But it just means mentally we don't throw them away. We don't act like, well, I'm not going to care about you, you know. I mean, we may never see them again. But we don't want to put them in the trash. They're no throwaway people. If consciousness never cease, then everybody counts, and we'll see them again and again and again and again and again and again and again, in all different roles. And the fact that things are momentary, we just keep coming back to the fact that just because I did this yesterday doesn't mean I'll ever do it again. We change. We're capable of change. With effort, with motivation, with wisdom. You know, we have to understand that our behavior yesterday isn't skillful or it's harmful or whatever, you know, and we decide, oh, well, maybe I should change strategy. And we're capable of change with the right information, with the right conditions. And we have good conditions because we have leisure time. We can even, you know, spend some time studying for a test on refuge. Yay, Anthony. You know, but we can, you know, many people are just trying to survive. They don't have any time to just sit back and read a book and think about how they're thinking. They're just trying to get through the day or get through the hour. So judging them, you know, might be questionable logic. Questions? So if you read further into Reba Rinpoche's thing in the readings on how to develop bodhicitta, or how to generate bodhicitta, he starts talking about exchanging self and other. And this is in the tradition of Shantideva. This is where we really look at the emptiness of, these labels of self and other. And we look at, how we're equally just a label on a body and mind. And then the exchanging self and other means that we exchange the way we put ourselves first. And we start putting others first. This is a mental exercise, not we're really trying to change the way we think. So it's that attitude we're exchanging. We're exchanging self-cherishing for cherishing others. So we have to equalize and then exchange. And then we'll talk about Tonglen, which is it's a practice of taking on the suffering of others and giving them our happiness. It is mental. So don't worry. It is a mental habit we're trying to develop. That's important only because we do have limitations. So we don't have to worry about going beyond our limitations. That wouldn't be wisdom. So anyway, I'm hot. I'm gonna quit now because I'm hot. Okay. In a couple of weeks, there'll be Medicine Buddha Puja on a Thursday night, which is a prayer practice where you're wishing, different kinds of horrible conditions to be eliminated, like poverty and famine and, whatever, all sorts of things. And so I decided, because I get to decide these things, that we will have it with class, because it's an hour practice. So we'll have the practice at 7, and then we'll follow with class, because I'm discovering Buddhism and how to develop bodhicitta. So doing a prayer practice for others is, so you can experience the way the Tibetans practice. This is how they. So this is Medicine Buddha. So I think it's in a couple of weeks. Might be 3 weeks. I don't know. I lose track. But anyway.
It's like the 14th.
So I don't want y'all to be running away going, I don't have to show up to that because it's really puja. It's part of class.
And it's really nice.
I really like Medicine Buddha Puja, even though I can't stand rituals. But, I like when I really listen to the words of it, because it's these prayers because it's based on this idea that there were 7 bodhisattvas who made all these prayers for, like people, they individually, they just had, it's like what you focus on. Oh, I'm really worried about people who don't have enough food, who are starving. And so they, made all these prayers. And so when they became Buddhas, that's what they represent, this real wish. And so when you're reading the words, by the time you finished it, you've covered every ill of the world. I mean, it's really, it's just a wonderful way to think, of just remembering, oh, I think I've got it tough. So, and we do it all in English. So you can actually understand the words. So that's nice. So anyway, you'll see. Okay, so rejoice that you spent this time, cultivating more knowledge about how one might perhaps enlarge their circle of concern. everybody benefits. You know, if the more and more inclusive we are in who we care about, you know, the more benefit. You know, it's just really simple. You know, in terms, of course, the world is better when we care about more people. So we really want to rejoice in the fact that we would even bother with such a subject in a world that pretty much encourages us to be self-focused. And then we want to dedicate whatever positive potentials we've created with our mind that might ripen in the future as positive things, not just chocolate. We want to share it with others. So, you know, this is why we read this on Sunday mornings. Let's read it tonight. The dedication prayers on page 246. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be free. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. So thank you very much for your efforts. Try to set a positive intention for whatever you're about to do, like I'm going to try to drive home safely. I'm going to try to enter my home with a mind of peace. You know, I'm not going to carry the burdens of my workday home with me, or I'm headed to work and I'm going to try to be of benefit when I'm there. So take good care.